Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. In mid-May, there will be a changing of the political card here in South Korea. President Moon Jae-in finishes his single 5-year term to be replaced by the conservative People Power Party's Suk-yeol. In the lead-up to his inauguration, Yoon's transition committee is laying the groundwork for the incoming president, and Yoon himself has nominated Han Duck-soo to be his prime minister, taking his first step toward filling what will be the first lineup of his cabinet anyway. Yoon has also sent a delegation to the United States to coordinate the changing of administrations in Seoul.
And they will be meeting with officials from the Biden administration, members of Congress, and personnel from U.S.-based think tanks over the several days. For more on the implications of the shift in political power in Korea and the diplomatic challenges facing the Yoon administration, we connect to Ramon Pacheco-Pardo, Professor of International Relations at King's College London. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, firstly, would like your opinion on President-elect Yoon nominating a former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo as his first Prime Minister, and considering Yoon's PPP will still be the minority party in May, do you expect Han and the future cabinet nominees to be approved by the Parliament without too much fuss?
Well, I think that the appointment of Han Duck-soo is a very clever political move because, of course, he was a Prime Minister under Roh Moo-hyun, the previous liberal president. He was also ambassador to the U.S. Under Lee Myung-bak, another conservative president. So I think that he's widely respected on both sides of the aisle. But more importantly, since he served under a liberal president as a prime minister, I think it should be easier for him to be nominated, or his nomination to be approved by the National Assembly dominated by the Liberal Party. And I think also that he's widely respected. He has held positions in the area of trade, in the area of foreign policy, also dealing with North Korea at some point as well. And even going back to 1997, in the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis. So he has a wealth of experience that I think will make his nomination, or the approval of his nomination by the National Assembly to become easier than it would have been with some other candidates.
Yeah, it certainly seems like it was a solid choice. We'll have to wait and see who else Yoon puts forward as his other ministers, see if they are equally as solid as the Prime Minister nominee. Now let's turn to the transition committee that's currently in the United States. Now, Yoon has said that they're going over there in an attempt to rebuild the alliance. And this suggests, of course, that he thinks South Korea-US ties, the alliance, has kind of weakened under the Moon Jae-in presidency. Firstly, do you agree with him on that to a degree? And how do you see Seoul-Washington ties developing over the next 5 years?
Well, I don't fully agree. I mean, of course, this is a point that any incoming conservative president would make about an outgoing liberal president. That's part of the course. But I think if we go back to the joint statement between President Moon and President Biden of last year, it was the longest bilateral statement between Korea and the U.S., and it touched on many different issues, way beyond North Korea, even Northeast Asian security matters. So I think the alliance is in a strong position. But I do think, though, that over the next 5 years, I think President-elect Yoon is going to be more willing to openly side with the U.S. In a way that outgoing President Moon hasn't been willing to do. And I'm not entirely sure this will necessarily strengthen the alliance, but certainly the perception is going to be that Korea and the U.S. are more aligned over the next 5 years when it comes to dealing with North Korea, when it comes to dealing with China, or to dealing with global matters as a whole. For example, this so-called battle between democratic regimes and authoritarian, democratic governments and authoritarian regimes that we are seeing at the global level.
Now, speaking of North Korea, as you mentioned, what do you think about Yoon's attitude toward North Korea? Do you think he would take a much more hardline approach toward the North compared to the current administration?
I think he will unless North Korea changes its behavior. But if North Korea continues with his missile tests, then I think the incoming Yoon government would be more critical of North Korea. Having said that, we should also mention that over the past few weeks and months, the Moon government has also become more critical of North Korea. And right now there is a spat, for example, between the Moon government and the Kim family, Kim Yo-yeol, right, the Kim Jong-un's sister, because of remarks that the defense minister of South Korea has made. So I think that attitudes in South Korea as a whole are hardening, but I think that Yoon and his government will be more vocal in their criticism of North Korea, for example, bringing issues such as human rights that have really been sidelined over the past few years. And in a sense, this will create more frictions with North Korea, unless, as I said, North Korea decided that they want to engage in a dialogue with South Korea and with the US. But right now, this doesn't really seem to be the case.
And finally, on China and Japan, overtly, it seems South Korea and China are getting on relatively well. They aren't particularly best buddies or anything like that. But relations with Japan clearly remain incredibly frosty. In regards to those two countries, can you see much changing under the incoming Yoon administration?
I think starting with Japan, we could see an improvement because many of the issues that affected the relationship in recent years were related to the leaders of the two countries, especially behavior of conservative behavior of Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, but also clearly Japanese leaders didn't want to deal with President Moon. So I think that having a new president coming in could actually have a positive effect in the relationship, in the same way that when Lee Myung-bak left office and was replaced by Park Geun-hye, then we saw an improvement in relations between Korea and Japan back then. When it comes to China, I think the relationship has really deteriorated in recent years, with Korea joining the G7 summit, the Summit for Democracy, criticizing China about its response to the COVID-19 pandemic and how secretive it was in the early stages of the pandemic. I don't think China feels very comfortable with the current position of the South Korean government. And I think, again, that President Yoon will probably be more openly critical of China. And this could lead to a further deterioration in relations, especially if, under President Yoon, Korea more openly sides with the US, with other democracies, including Japan.
All right. We experienced a little bit of disconnection, but we got most of his answers. That was Professor Pacheco Pardo from King's College London.